let's, keep running with this one for a little bit because it might fit the profile for 18, or it could fit a special niche release down the road. Let's hold back on some of our, potential farm stocks that we might have wanted to go a little bit deeper on, but maturity-wise, they're not quite there. Having such depth of inventory really gives me a lot of room to play, a lot of room to sort of leave the future wide open and capitalize on current products like the 10-year in order to make sure the consistency remains. The flavor profile is there time and time again, and we're never losing it. We're never not hitting it.
Cool. Everything you just said was awesome, except for it sounds like we have no sound on Facebook right now.
I figured out what the problem was, and it has been fixed. It just takes a second or two for it.
No, it'll take a second. All right. Hi, everyone. We're back. Should we just run it? No, so Pete was just going over what it's like to have all of these samples, and basically the job of making sure that there's consistency, knowing each of the different bonds in the warehouses, recognizing what they taste like and where they're at, and having a keen sense of like, okay, this barrel or this batch, I should say, from this source or from this source needs a little more time, it's ready, etc. Pete, what most fascinates me about the whole process is you guys aren't just working with one source of whiskey. You aren't just working with one product. How tricky is it to basically recreate just the 10-year over and over again, let alone all the other stuff that you guys are making, all the projects you're working on? How tricky is it to actually just recreate that 10-year consistently over and over again?
It's a lot trickier than you might think, but again, with that sort of front end work, it's a lot less tricky. Getting to know the stocks again is so vital. Knowing that, okay, Bond 83 is at this point in its life. Bond 242 probably shouldn't be used in even 10-year until it's about 12, 13 years old. And again, coming from multiple sources, we're not just looking at one climate, ADL, or one, two climates, Indiana. We've got various sources, others which remain undisclosed, which all have different expressions of rye, different profiles. And even within one distillery, you're going to find quite a bit of variation in your batches that you own, that you have sourced, that you brought from maybe Canada to Vermont and have been in Vermont for 5-7 years, which will significantly change their profile. It's really keeping an eye, knowing what the whiskeys are like, involving the team, always having an idea of where things are at. And in terms of how tricky is it to keep that consistency going, it's, again, as simple as spending a hell of a lot of time to get to know your whiskey, understand the flavor profile of the 10-year, and then forecast out for as far as we possibly can, how do we keep this blend consistent? Because again, this is a blend. I don't think it was on audio earlier, but this is a blend, and that's a good thing. The 10-year-old is a blend of whiskeys, as almost every single whiskey you're going to drink is, and it is a blend for consistency. We're taking whiskey that's minimum 10 years old, but oftentimes up to 16, 17 years old to hit this profile, which is sweet, spicy, not spicy, bomb, but rounded with complexity, with barrel extractors, with some softness, but presence in the mouth, with a great lasting finish. It's really, honestly, what it comes down to it, spreadsheets. Here's my bond, here's my bond, here's my bond, here's my percentage of the blend. It's going to run out around here. We're going to replace it with these 3 bonds, which when blended at certain percentages, give us the same or better flavor profile. And it's that idea of we're not just taking a barrel and dumping it and putting it in a bottle and saying, there's your 10-year. We're dumping maybe a fraction of one barrel, several barrels of another batch, a ton more of another, blending them together and having these different whiskeys that might have a softer profile, which accepts other flavor better, a super spicy profile, which we might want to use a little bit less of because it could overwhelm, a sweeter profile, which will help round out the blend entirely, pulling on these stocks at the right times, at the right age points, which age doesn't matter so much to me as much as flavor, and making sure that we can keep that blend consistent for as long as we can, which in my mind is definitely forever. Our forecasts go out 5 to 10 years. Obviously, it's hard to say what the flavor of whiskey that's just been distilled is going to be like in 10 years. So we're always pivoting. We're always ready to think on our feet. We've always got backup plans, if you will. Okay, if this bond, which we're planning on using, or batch rather, that we're planning on using in 3 years, doesn't turn out to have this spice-forward profile that it's exhibiting, we can pivot and replace it with these 2 or 3 or 1 other batches that are going to give us the same, if not better, profile blended together. And again, that's just one component of a larger blend that goes into something like the 10 or the 15.
So actually, Go, Nick.
No, go ahead, Sam.
I was gonna say you brought up a really great point about most of the whiskeys that we drink today are blended, and we have a lot of single malt Scotch fanatics in our group. I know I count myself among those folks. I do think that single barrel has been fetishized a bit in the world of whiskey, and I'm curious to hear from you about your association between blending and flavor, because I think that we all like to put on this pedestal the idea of a beautiful honey cask, like this one single cask that's just bursting with flavor. But if you talk to, Dave Broom, if you talk to Serge Valentin, they all say that in most cases, a small blend is way more delicious, more complex, and more nuanced than any single pick anyone can create. And it's kind of why I wanted to talk about blends with you specifically. Your title is Master Blender. I want to know about how much you can control flavor as a blender that you could never hope to achieve in one single cask, and how much is blending really a tool in the tool belt as opposed to this scary word that kind of people might not totally understand.
Right, because blending has typically been associated with blended whiskeys, which have typically been bottom shelf fillers, if you will, when in reality, blending is something that happens across the board in every single product that's non-single barrel that we are drinking today. And that's a good thing, because again, every barrel, back to your mention of honey barrels, single barrels, they're going to have their own specific unique flavor profile. And it's a give and a take, because some of those barrels have the most amazing singular characteristics that might not fit into the classic 10-year profile, but shine so beautifully on their own. And we flag those and we set them aside for our 10-year single barrel program, for our 12-year bespoke blend, for our new 15-year single barrel program. However, everything else, the blending is so important, because oftentimes you're dealing with a bond or a batch that might not have those flavor notes that you're looking for. It's a little bit too soft, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, because that just means it's going to accept other flavors well. And that means I can play with it a little bit. When I talk about blending to people, I almost build a pyramid of, here's our base. It's maybe not the most flavorful spirit. It's maybe not the biggest, boldest in your face, but it's going to allow you to layer on flavors to build up that triangle with something like a complexity note, then a nuance note, and then just an extra top note, whether it be that base spice profile on the bottom with a bit of savoriness, add on a bit of caramel sweetness from the barrel, add on a little bit extra spice, baking spice wise, add on just a hint of vanilla, and then you have something like the 10-year. Blending is all about complexity, and you're right insofar as I agree with the notion that you can evoke a better rounded, more complex and more available, if you will, flavor profile via blending, because you are quite literally picking and choosing specific inputs. It's almost like if I said, hey, Sammy, make me a cocktail, but grab whatever the hell you can grab real quick and just dump it in. Or if I said, hey, Sammy, make me a Manhattan as you know how to, guess what's going to turn out better? The second, staying true to that actual on blend consistency batch to batch. And it might be a matter of tweaking the blend every 6 months. It might be every 2 weeks, depending on our stocks. But again, if the consumer can't taste the difference, then we've won. And what we actually do is something as simple as triangle testing, where we will test every single person in the office that we possibly can. If we're changing a blend, I'll give you 3 whiskeys. 2 of them are the same, one's different. Tell me which one is different. If the data proves that nobody can significantly tell the difference, then that tells us our blend is on point. We're sticking to flavor profile. In fact, we've oftentimes improved the flavor profile of things like 10-year through things like this, these triangle testing, chi-square prep and testing, all these sort of nerdy, boring, but also fun things that make whiskey just as good as it is, just as beautiful as it is, and batch to batch wise, as consistent as we want it. To the nature of a single barrel, you'd expect to find some differences. I've had 10-year single barrels that are honey forward, that are maple syrup bombs, that aren't even spicy at all. On the contrary, I've had earth bombs with so much spice going on, no sweetness whatsoever. We flag those specifically because we know they deserve to be bottled on their own. However, not every barrel is worthy of being drank as a single cask. And for me, it's something as simple as you take a sip, it burns the back of your palate. That's not a cask strength whiskey. It might technically be cask strength, but it is not deserving of being bottled as such. something like that would be flagged as, okay, going into maybe the 10, maybe the 15 down the road, maybe not even for a number of years, but again, picking the right barrels, setting them aside, and then giving them to the consumer, to the bar, retailer, whatever it is, to pick their specific flavor profile. We like to give people a range of, again, earthy, spicy, sweet, rounded, if you will, and let them find their niche, find their specific flavor profile that they're really looking for, and let them play around with that.
When you're playing with older whiskeys, and you're releasing a 15-year that's new, or a Boss Hog, or some project that is either going to be, I guess it's probably very different if it's going to be new versus if it's going to be a single one-off release. But when you're doing something like playing with creating a new Boss Hog, are you saying, okay, this is what we have available in our stocks for it, and let's go make Boss Hog? Or do you have a plan and then you go look at the stocks and sort of fill in, okay, I want to make this, and I know I could do it if I take this, this, and this? Which direction does it go? Is it, okay, I have this available, so what can I make? Or I want to make this, what do I have available?
I'd say it's more the latter than anything, but it's a little bit more complex. Again, look back to the blending out, not just right now, not just for the next 6 months, but for the next 5 to 10 years. You better believe we're looking at Boss Hog in the same way, flagging certain batches for potential Boss Hogs. And come this year, next year, okay, Boss Hog is going to be finished in X, Y, or Z barrel. Which batches fit that profile best? Which batches are showing me that they deserve to be drank at cask strength, that they're going to mesh well with whatever the finish is? Last year being that Umishu. In fact, it turned out to be a big, bold-ass rye whiskey that worked beautifully with the Umishu finish, that sweeter, tartar, sort of savory plum liqueur. You might not expect a big, bold, in-your-face, almost Boss Hog 3-ish flavor-wise to mesh well with a softer, sweeter, again, tartar finish. But when you find those right batches, and what we'll do is we'll trial if you see a Boss Hog, it's only because we've trialed the hell out of it. And that means I'm taking, so let's say, just for the sake of conversation, we're going to do a rum finish for the Boss Hog. I'll get various different types of rum casks in, and I've worked with rum quite a bit in the past, so I've already got a standing off point to go from. Get sample weekly, daily, depending on where we're at in the finishing process. And we actually let things over finish to almost prove ourselves right. Let's say at week 3 or month 2, I'm goddamn sure it's at its peak. The only way to be for sure is to let it go another day, another week, and see that downward trend. We're trialing the hell out of everything, making sure the barrels actually are going to work for a larger scale production for something like Boss Hog in particular. And we're doing it well before. And that's why something I'm drinking right now might be something like an upcoming Boss Hog. It's because we're thinking about these things well in advance, where there's that foresight where I already kind of know what next year's Boss Hog is going to be, to almost a T. Yeah, granted, we still have to trial it. We still have to make sure all the whiskey meshes, but I have in my mind all these different batches that could fit the bill, all these different finishes that we're potentially going to lean on. And it's really, again, going back to the knowledge of the inventory, knowing what whiskey is going to play best with what finishing cask. And depending on the year specific to Boss Hog, what whiskey is going to, at cask strength, play best for that finishing cask. Because we oftentimes only see 12-year single finish as our sort of experimentation line with different finishes, but it's at 86 proof, not a cask strength product. With Boss Hog, we get to see that reflection of the cask flavor a little bit more intensely in a lot of ways.
That's just a fascinating process. I'm doubly intrigued because I feel like most people don't understand that rye is a relatively young category, and there aren't like so many examples of people who have been doing it forever and ever and ever, except for, actually, honestly, except for in Canada, where rye never became unpopular. But as a result, you guys are in a position where, I don't know, you're doing a lot of things that you're leading the category. You're doing a lot of things that aren't really getting done yet. And I'm curious with your experience, what's it like working with rye? Rye has this history of being an unwieldy, difficult to use grain. It often shows well young. You guys are aging it for a long time. Is that really is that reputation reflected in your experience?
Well, rye's kind of like the problem child in a sense. It's like the third kid who happened to go the punk route, and he's got a mohawk, and the parents have no idea what to do with him. But in reality, it's because they haven't approached him right. They haven't said, "Hey, what's going on?" Haven't gotten to know him better. And that's the case with rye across the industry, where for almost a century we treated rye as this thing that's only for the 1 in a million customer that's going to come in and order a rye Manhattan. We have to have it on the back bar, but in the well, in only one of 2 or 3 different products that are available. In reality, rye is so much more than what we have thought it to be. And we've really thought of rye as just one thing up until about a decade or so ago. Rye is spicy. That was the industry standard. Rye is spicy. Rye is nothing else. But I will tell you this, rye is everything else and then some, all depending on how you treat it every step of the production process. That comes from the grain input, the mashing, the yeast strain you're using, the fermentation profile, the distillation. Are you distilling heavy or light? What type of barrel you're putting it into? Massively important, especially now that we see a trend towards toasting and charring in our barrels for American whiskey. You can evoke so many different flavors from this space spirit that are not just spicy in your face. We've got spicy as our sort of neutral, natural, central focal point for the flavor of rye, but we've also got herbaceousness and sweetness and floral qualities across the map, again, depending on how you treat it. And you can taste that through a lot of our products. Now, the 10-year is your classic quintessential, bigger, bolder, spicier, in-your-face rye, but something like the 12-year could not be more different and is still damn near 100% rye by content, but it's sweeter, it's softer, it's a bit more Scotch-like almost. Go to our 15-year, and we deepen that a little bit more with a finishing barrel. Rye can actually evoke the qualities of a finishing cask, in my opinion, much better than, say, a corn-forward mash bill will. Rye tends to hold up the distillate character for quite a bit longer than bourbon would. Say 6, 8 years in wood, bourbon starts to get a little bit dominated by the wood itself. For us, we're in a bit of a colder climate, a little bit more humid, so our aging is a little bit less intensive. And again, we're dealing with source whiskeys coming from different areas across the world, really. So we have to take into account their climates as well. But rye is so much fun to play with because it isn't just spicy. It's so much more. And Boss Hog is one of the great ways to evoke these different expressions of what rye can be. And I'd say something like farm stock as well, where you taste farm stock crop 3, this guy right here, which is 52% by blend, 3-year-old rye whiskey. And it's soft and it's sweet and it's floral and it's lighter and it's not intense in your face like you might expect a young rye to be. And that's because we've treated the process correctly from that every step of the way, the fermentation, the distillation, but almost more importantly, the barrel type that we're using. We're not just throwing our whiskey into a standard char 3 barrel and calling it a day. We're experimenting with our barrel partners like ISC to create barrels that will evoke the exact flavor profile that we're looking for. It might be something that the rye whiskey drinking community has never seen before and won't see for 6, 8 more years. But it's that idea of rye being an open category. Rye has been restricted to typically, again, just Wells or Canadian blends. Granted, there are some fantastic older Canadian whiskeys out there as well. But to give a little background, the 10-year was originally being used as a flavoring stock for a certain more bottom shelf Canadian blended product. If you mix together basically 5% or less of something like 10-year with 95% or more basically barrel-aged vodka, something that's been distilled to a very high proof, it's light in flavor, it's cost effective to produce, it's aged in used wood for 3 years and a day to meet requirements for Canada specifically, that would work for Scotland as well. Take that, you blend in just a little bit of the 10-year and you get some flavor. That's the most terrible use of this whiskey I could ever imagine. We almost rescued this whiskey in a sense from being misused as a flavoring stock. And for the first time gave people an idea of what rye really could be. Because again, nobody was willing to put this out as its own product. And some brands tried and failed. Dave Pickerel actually tried a few times before WhistlePig to get rye out there. And thankfully, he landed on WhistlePig and was able to bring the 10-year to the world. And again, rescue these stocks that would have been misused and would have been diminished. It's almost like if I took this 10-year and I just dumped in a whole bunch of water. You'd lose that flavor entirely. It would just be a more sort of bland expression, and it isn't the true idea of rye. And it's really limited the consumer's identity of what rye whiskey is and can be. Hopefully, through things like this, through trade shows, through tastings, we are able to expand, and not just my own company, myself, but as an industry, to expand that mental capacity of what rye can be, will continue to be, and the innovation within. And I think we've seen almost more innovation through rye than any other whiskey category in America to date, specifically with a lot of craft brands, whether that's using even just simply different toast levels on a rye grain and a mash bill. On a younger whiskey, you can evoke these great chocolatey notes, these great sort of roasty mocha notes, if you're willing to play. But it's not something the world has seen. It's hard for us as producers to take a gamble because the palate's not used to a rye whiskey that's going to be super herbal, but also super spicy, but also super sweet. They're going to say, what the hell is this? But if you can take the time and educate them and say, here's what rye is. Rye whiskey is 51% or more rye in the grain by mash bill, but it doesn't have to stop there. And in fact, 100% rye doesn't just have to be a spice bomb, punchy, in your face whiskey. It can be something smoother, softer, a little bit lighter. Good example would be our 18 year, which is 94% rye by mash bill. And again, 18 years in new wood, new charred American oak. You would expect that to be a wood bomb, just tannin on the back end, drying you out, burning the back of your palate. It could not be more different. It almost drinks more like a well-aged Oloroso Scotch would, in the sense that it's softer, it's lighter, it's velvety. 92 proof, it still holds up in terms of flavor profile, in terms of mouthfeel, but it's not a rye spice bomb. If anything, the spiciness is more of a baking spice on the cinnamon, the nutmeg, the cardamom side of things. So it's so much fun to be able to kind of redefine rye, because rye was the predominant spirit pre-prohibition, as I'm sure you guys know, as I know you guys know, went by the wayside for various legislative reasons. After prohibition basically was only used for that one guy who happened to come in and say, hey, I want a rye Manhattan. But now we're seeing the revival. We're seeing what rye whiskey really can be through products like 10 year, like 15 year, like 6 year, but like Piggyback rather, but also through every other brand across the country, through various brands that might not be rye centric, but are experimenting with it. Balcones, Sagamore Spirit, all these different brands across the country, across the world as well, are showing the consumer rye. Hey, guess what? You thought it was one thing, but it really can be a number of different things, much like a single malt can, much like now we're seeing Irish whiskey can be, and much like, again, Canadian whiskey itself can be. Different expressions, treated differently, treated with care, and you can evoke the most beautiful flavor profile that has not been seen before. Might challenge the palate, might challenge the consumer's initial idea of what the category should be. If I gave you a bourbon that was spicy as hell with these great cinnamon notes, but no corn sweetness, you'd be like, whoa, but you might not reject it. With bourbon, that's a bit easier because bourbon is more accessible. Bourbon, we love bourbon. It's America's spirit, bourbon. It has such a nice name to it. Rye is a little bit more confusing and scary, but challenging that notion, that's what WhistlePig is all about. That's what we as an industry are all about, I hope, across the board. And I've seen it through various other producers, really getting people to know that rye is not just something to be afraid of that's going to hurt you, punch you in the back of the throat. In fact, it can be softer, sweeter, floral. It can be more like a single malt than a rye whiskey, what you thought a rye whiskey was, and bringing different definitions as we have through the 10, through the 12, through the 15, through the 18, through farm stock, and to continue to do so down the line. Expect to see something like our farm stock line, which for us quite simply means products coming from the farm, be it whiskey, be it different spirits, be it even our maple syrup, which I know Nick probably has a bottle in his fridge that he swigs every morning, as I do. Good stuff. But yeah, just this idea of expanding the category, breaking the category of rye, and redefining it, because there has been this really narrow definition of what rye whiskey is for so long, and it's a shame. It's no one's fault, but now's the time to redefine that.
But part of the problem is there's been nobody playing with it, right? Like eventually you need somebody to be there. Speaking of which, you mentioned Dave Pickerel, and one of the things that we talk a lot about when we're doing classes and when we're doing our sort of our whiskey spiel is that the connectivity that you get to people who are making the whiskeys and basically the influence they have. And Dave obviously had a vision, which, even though he's passed away, can basically be carried on at the distillery. And I'm curious, like, you know, how do I ask this? How much of his vision are you guys still sort of continuing down that path? And you know, beyond what he foresaw and what he was looking at, where are you guys going to take it from there?
Well, first things first, let's pour one out for Dave real quick here.
Yeah, seriously.
So the mission has always been to deliver Vermont rye to the world, and not just Vermont rye, but rye whiskey in general, and to continue to innovate on that category. And we've seen a lot of that on the back end with special projects like the Boss Hog. But what you're not seeing is that front end innovation, which you won't see for a number of years, because whiskey does unfortunately take a little bit of time to reach maturity. We are experimenting with, we're trying to keep everything as Vermont as possible, not just for the sake of, but because we know we have the most quality ingredients possible. We grow all of our own grain on the farm, and that's not just rye, that's other grains as well. We're experimenting with everything from wheat to barley to triticale, you name it. We're experimenting with different sort of malting profiles even. Local malt house, Peterson Malt, is a fantastic guy. I met him, last time I saw him was in February, and he's wearing shorts and flip-flops. It's -12 out, and he's good to go. Classic Vermonter. But he's malting in such a crafty way that I know I'm getting the most quality period out of that roast profile. Even if it's a crystal malt, just super simple, classic malting profile, it's going to be a higher quality than if I went to a larger scale, less crafty producer. It's using the inputs from our farm, the well water itself, the grain itself, which is going to express the terroir of the land. It's using the actual oak around the farm, you know, staying true to that pickerel vision of let's make Vermont rye. Let's also make rye whiskey a real thing as a category, but let's stay true to Vermont as well. And we're seeing that through farm stock, the recent release home stock. Again, we'll continue to see future releases down the line, which I can only tease thus far. But the farm production has done nothing but expand in terms of innovation, in terms of capacity wise. I mean, we installed a second still last year to really pump things up a little bit. Even personnel, you know, we're expanding our knowledge base, we're expanding our people, and we're really getting a better grasp on how to make the best rye whiskey, because we are really bringing, in my opinion, the best rye whiskey to the world, and we'd love to continue to do so. And we'd love to actually even go past that with our own distillate, with our own farm-based, Vermont-centric, very different but very delicious rye whiskey.
Okay, so you've tasted a rye or two in your day.
Yeah.
When is there anything when you're tasting rye? Is there a flavor profile? Is there something that's not something you always find in a really good rye, where a note or something when you're blending, or when you find a really spectacular barrel where you're like, this shit is awesome. Hold the phone. Like this is what I like. This is unusual, and this is really the unusual note that I identify and love in rye.
I would say there's no one answer for that, because it's really like finding for single barrel in particular, the whiskeys that are drinking best between cask strength, this might be 100 proof, up to 125, tends to be our upper level. Past that, you tend to get a huge palate burn, so we're not really looking to give you a negative experience. I mean, there's nothing I hate more than somebody saying, oh, it's a single barrel of XYZ and it's 140 proof, and they pour themselves a sip. They take it and they're like, oh my God, and they never buy a single barrel again. You know, it's picking the right barrels themselves. But in terms of what flavor profile most excites me, it's more the differentiation therein. It's finding those barrels that are, holy shit, this is 100% rye, 14 and a half years old, but it's a vanilla bomb in your face, and there's not that much spice character to it. On the other hand, there could be this super earthy, super almost mossy, like you're crunching on some wet bark. That's a rye expression that you're not going to see in anything other than a single barrel. Really narrowing those down and allowing the then retailer, bar manager, whoever it is who wants to buy that private barrel, say, oh yeah, this one is for me. Because again, everybody has a different preference in terms of flavor profile. Some people like sweet, some people hate sweet, some people like spicy, some people hate spicy. It's a matter of giving people a variety, a range, and saying, okay, this one's a dill bomb, let's keep that. This one's a mint bomb, let's keep that. This one's a vanilla bomb, let's keep that. This one's a little bit more rounded, let's keep that. Flagging them for single barrel, be it 10-year single barrel or 15-year single barrel, and really saying, let the consumer say what speaks to them. Any rejects from the single barrel program will then take and blend back into 10-year if it actually, if it turns out sometimes we're wrong, actually, as producers. Believe it or not, we're not the mad geniuses you give us credit for.
I'm going to give you a little more credit, Pete. I'm curious to know, we got a lot of single malt Scotch drinkers, and I think, not necessarily everybody as enlightened as folks that get to hang around barrels every day. I'm curious to know, your dad loves single malts, and I'm sure you've had one.
You promised my dad would not be brought up, you motherfucker.
Let's bring him out. Here he is.
6 feet away.
He's not a Zoom. I'm sorry. I'm curious to know, how would you sell rye whiskey to a single malt Scotch drinker? Because that's kind of a border for a lot of Scotch drinkers. Like, how do you convince someone to try out American whiskey or WhistlePig specifically?
But not your dad. Not your dad.
Not my dad.
Your
right,
dad's
anybody.
easy. This is mine, and he's like, I got it.
He has the good nerve to drink from a glass, actually. But regardless, Sammy, you're not wrong at all. I mean, it's real tough to say,
it's
hey,
a glass.
Yeah. Hey, you're used to this lighter, maybe not necessarily lighter, but more delicate, more distillate forward flavor profile. All of a sudden, we're giving you this big in-your-face American oak with char extract. The barrel influence is so much more intensive in American whiskey than it is in most other world whiskeys that don't have that new char law. However, it's finding the right whiskey. I mean, my favorite thing is at a trade show. Sammy, you walked with me. You say, oh, I love the Macallan 18. And I say, all right, great. Let's start with the 12-year, because the 12-year is a rye whiskey through and through. But again, it's a sweeter, fruitier, bit softer, bit more mellow, less pepper spice, more baking spice, more approachable to somebody who has a Scotch forward palate. The 18-year is another great example. Price point wise, it's a bit more, less accessible in that sense, but it's really being able to teach people that their conception of rye is a misconception and offering them the right products. If you love bourbon, you hate rye, well, then I might give you Farm Stock 3, because we've got some great bourbon-like notes, which in reality are just barrel extractives working with the distillate in a beautiful way, but they mimic that bourbon character. And that's a great way. It's so much fun to see somebody take a sip and go, oh yeah, I do like that. Okay, I do like rye now. Scotch is definitely tough to break that mold, because again, we're looking at usually older whiskeys. We're looking at whiskeys that have been in used wood. We're looking at whiskeys that are finished, but the versatility in our portfolio definitely allows us to say, okay, drinker X, drinker Y, drinker Z, they all prefer totally different things, but we've got just a thing for each of them. Be it piggyback, be it 12-year, be it 18-year, be it Boss Hog 4, across the board. It's that idea of the versatility within the rye category that I was mentioning earlier, where rye isn't just spicy, and then finding that specific person's preferred flavor profile and recommending the right whiskey to them, and even teaching them, hey, 92 proof on a rye whiskey might seem a little aggressive. You're used to 80 proof, 80, 86, or for international, 40%, 43%. 92, 100 proof might seem scary, but just take a second, take a small sip, smallest sip you've ever taken in your life, let it sit on your palate, let it work. Expect that oak to be a little bit more dominant, but the education piece is the most important part, especially when it comes to bringing the single malt community into the rye world, because it is very scary. Again, we're used to rye just being this big, punchy, spicy, overly done in a sense spirit. But when treated correctly, it can appeal to just about any drinker. And I've literally seen it happen countless times across the country, across the world, at trade shows, at tastings, even just face to face with somebody who, oh, you like whiskey? Let me grab a bottle on my car real quick and let's taste some 10-year. See what, give me your take.
I'm really curious. How much time are you spending on the road? Is it like, as a master blender, I see all these master distillers, master blenders, they're never actually at the distillery, and you get questions of like, all right, this is interesting. How often are you on the road these days?
These days, take a guess.
Pre-COVID.
However, pre-COVID, we're looking at hopefully at most a week, sometimes up to 2, depending on what's going on. Say there's a new product launch, and per month, about a week or 2. I try to keep it as limited as possible because, again, I need to be physically on site to oversee this whiskey. even if it's just a batch-to-batch transition or a larger project like a Boss Hog, where I need to be there every goddamn day to sample it to make sure that we're hitting profile. Again, it depends on what's going on, new product release, something like a farm stock, where for farm stocks 2, for 1, we brought people to the farm, but for 2 and 3, I went out into the world and actually did crowd blending events. And I was on the road for 2 months straight doing these events, which are only expanding sort of my knowledge of what the consumer is looking for in terms of flavor profile, but also bringing with me, you know, various samples so I can keep up with the Joneses, keep my blending, you know, prowess going, keep in touch with the farm, and last but not least, having the right people at the farm to keep the dream alive. You know, Nick.
When you're on the road, I because you must be running into you know, the Lumsdens of the world,
the Sammy Karachis of the world too.
The Sammy Karachis of the world. Who's the funniest asshole you deal with a lot? Like what people don't realize is like people all the time are go to these trade shows and you'll like you interact, you know, it's like, oh, it's Lumsden, and then all of a sudden you find out that Lumsden tells dirty jokes that I literally wouldn't let my dogs hear. Like who's the guy who's just, who do you always run into who's hilarious? And
I mean, you obviously, but dude, be easy on Red. Red's an old boy. He deserves to hear the dirtier jokes, man. Come on. You know. That's a good question. It depends. Honestly, more often than not, it's whoever happens to be right next to me, and it's making that connection. I know you guys have seen this on your own time at your own trade shows where you're just like, you know, you're hanging out, you're saying, oh, how's the night going for you? You're watching one guy who's way too drunk and you're like, oh God, he's going to fall over. And he does, you know. I don't know. I run into.
My bad. Sorry about that.
I love to run into the people at Axiom Brands, which is a UK-based international distributor, but they're partners of ours. They represent a lot of different brands like Starward, like JJ Corey. But to the people within themselves, Ian Bayless and Catherine, who run it, fantastic people. I'll see them usually abroad, but oftentimes in the US as well. Those are some of my, and again, not the answer you're looking for. I'm sure you were expecting like, oh, Jimmy Russell and me, you know, we love to send dirty texts at 3 a.m. to each other. But
yeah, no, that is what I was looking for. That's literally exactly what I was saying. Is that not, that's not, I mean, last time I saw you, that's exactly what you told me. You were like,
we got bad information.
Fine. No, bad prep work. Fine. That's fine.
So that's on you guys. Come on.
Pete, when we're not drinking whiskey to excess or to a reasonable amount, I'm curious to know what you're drinking.
And I'd like to hear your guess as to what I'm drinking.
Vodka tonics.
Close, but not close. Oh, I love me a good shitty buttery Chardonnay. Nothing better.
Buttery Chardonnay.
Buttery Chardonnay. You think I'm joking? Yeah. If you want to devolve that even. What's that?
Are you using WhistlePig casks
for this buttery Chardonnay? I think that would overwhelm the delicate nature of these buttery, beautifully crafted, inexpensive Chardonnays a little bit too much, with too much flavor in the first place. But no, I'm drinking, honestly, it's funny. People expect me to drink like the highest end whiskey in the world, but like, guess what? I've just spent 8-10 hours tasting through incredibly flavorful whiskey, incredibly flavorful nose, palate. You know, I can still feel it. Guess what? All I want is a Truly right now. Give me a freaking mango Truly and I'm good to go. You know, it's that balancing of the heavy and the light, you know, and it almost gives you a better perspective because if anything, I'd be giving myself more palate shock in a sense. But if you're focusing on flavor all day fucking long, guess what? All you want to do is not focus on that afterwards, you know, separative work and play, you know.
I didn't make a single cocktail for myself when I was bartending.
Exactly, Sammy.
I didn't want to make another goddamn. I was drinking Tecate.
All right, hold on a sec. Hold on a sec, because we got a question coming in. Zach,
yeah.
What's the question coming in?
Yeah, sure. We got a question from Barry. Pete, can you speak to the farm stock offering and where you see that going?
So farm stock on the whole. So farm stock is basically this idea of products coming from the farm, and the notion behind it has transitioned with the times. Even with our most recent release, Home Stock, which is a whole bag of worms I won't really dive too deep into. But regardless, farm stock is this idea of expressions coming from the farm. We've seen a lineup of farm stocks 1 through 3, 4 now, including Home Stock, which, to be super brief, Home Stock was a crowdsourced whiskey that we basically worked with Flaviar to create. We sent out blending kits of actually these little guys right here, a rye whiskey at 4 years old, and a wheat and a barley whiskey, barley, not malted barley, at 5.5 years old, and basically said, blend away, send us your results. I took in the data. I said, here are the top blends. We did a live stream where people then voted on their favorite blends, and we made the next version of farm stock, which we call home stock, given the fact that it was blended together while apart at home. See that ideology and think about it expanding past those boundaries. I mean, I guarantee you guys probably didn't think we had any wheat or any rye whiskey, or sorry, non-rye whiskey rather, hanging out. Nick, I know you know better, but regardless, people don't expect to see these expressions coming out from us. And it's that challenging that idea of, okay, WhistlePig is 10-year, 12-year, 15-year, farm stock's following this trajectory. But guess what? You're going to find some random ass things coming from the farm. Something as simple as our maple spirit, which may never hit the shelves, but we're taking our maple syrup, we're watering it down a bit for fermentation purposes, fermenting it, distilling it, aging it in our Vermont oak, and actually having a Vermont maple rum, which we literally drink on the farm so much that it will never actually be able to make it to market because quantity-wise. That idea of farm-based innovation, that might be something like a specific product like farm stock, but it's even simple things like cultivating our own yeast strains. We've been cultivating yeast for a couple of years from various areas around the farm, crab apples, the distillery itself. We've been using koji actually as an enzymatic conversion agent. Koji was a big part of Bossog 6. Koji's a whole rabbit hole which we won't go down, but regardless, we're really trying to keep things as close to home as possible, try to stay as independent in a sense as possible, not rely on outside sources. Growing your own grain is a great way to do that. Having your own source of water that you don't necessarily have to have super treated is fantastic. Being able to dispose of your wastewater, of your waste pot bottoms even, in a way that benefits farmers and methane producers as well is fantastic. You know, just really working the farm angle in every way we can, not gimmick-wise, but really productivity-wise, really sort of ROI-wise, where it's like, all right, guys, let's double down on this, but before we do that, let's make sure it's the right call. And that's why you see things like farm stock come out, where we didn't want to put out a 1-year-old whiskey, but farm stock 1, the demand was so high because people have been clamoring for WhistlePig whiskey since 2010, because our mission has always been to bring you Vermont rye whiskey. But we're like, guys, we're not going to put just 1-year-old whiskey, despite how good it might be, in a bottle. The answer to that, again, we weren't thinking like this, but we'd say, okay, we've got these extra stocks with a bit of age, a lot of different flavor profile that we can then use to balance out the negative impacts of these youthful whiskeys. And something like farm stock is born. Something like the farm stock line is born. Expect that sort of line of thinking to continue to expand. And I would expect to see more iterations of farm stock like products come out in the near and far future, but potentially nearer than you think.
That's awesome. How hard is it to get it right with your own products, like with your own agricultural products, with your own yeast strands? Like that's a lot of experimentation, and obviously the feedback loop takes time, versus you guys are able to pick and choose from your suppliers in Canada and in Indiana and so forth. Here are the exact components we want. Here's how we could, you know, tweak them and blend them to make them just what we want. So you're really kind of getting those inputs ahead of time, versus how hard is it when you just have to create these inputs from scratch? And, you know, like, do you think that you're getting way better at it, or did you kind of figure it out right off the bat, or do you think it'll continue to get better and better as you go along?
So I'd say A, it's definitely a learning curve, and then B, we're definitely going to continue to get better as we go along. Insofar as before the distillery was built in 2015, we were growing grain since 2009, but we weren't really storing it that well. We weren't really harvesting it in the proper way. Year after year, those practices improve. Suddenly we've got silos with proper ventilation systems. Suddenly we've got a proper contract harvester that's going to have a proper combine set to the proper height so that he's not chopping off half the seeds. Instead, we're getting all the rye berries. Little sort of small improvements like that, getting the team built up in a sense where, okay, we have a small maintenance team, but now we have a new maintenance manager who has some farm background. Our guy down the road, oh my God, the guy who who actually owns Shaxbury, his dad has a lot of farming experience. Let's bring him in, have him help us out in a sense. It is definitely difficult to control, but once you get there, it's a learning curve. Once you get to that point of, oh, okay, we need to store rye at under this % moisture in this certain silo because of our super cold, super wet, super humid, but also fluctuatiousness of our winters. We don't want that rye to rot in that actual silo. and learning over the years, okay, if you do this in a certain way, you're going to achieve certain results. Maybe when you harvest corn in a bag and it's going to rain that night, you should store that bag in a barn immediately. You know, it's the small things like that to the big things like having a proper milling facility, which actually ventilates properly and actually has a, for us, hammer mill, which is more effective on rye than a roller mill, which you might use for something like barley if you're looking to keep the husks intact. You know, it's the small, little, simple, you wouldn't even think like, oh yeah, that 80-day corn, we should have harvested at day 80, not day 85, to the bigger picture things like having, again, that more dedicated siloage, milling, proper storage and whatnot, and building up the infrastructure on the farm itself to keep ourselves sustainable forever, really, and to really continue that expansion. Nick, I don't think you've been to the farm for about 2 years now, but you'd be shocked at the changes, small but visible in production-wise, you know, putting in a new still, moving the location of our masher so that it actually transfers heat a little better. Putting in, again, this, we call it the church mill, I call it the Winston church mill, but where we have our actual proper milling rather than having our milling done in this like Quonset hut, as we'd call it. It's basically a semicircle of really shitty rusty iron that I'm sitting and milling grain by the bucket into. Well, guess what? Now we've got a proper sort of auger system where you just push a button, you monitor, you wait, you get the perfect amount of rye ground every time to a better profile so we can extract more starch, get more flavor out of the actual grain. It's not that we started in a bad place. It's more that we're only getting better as we go. And I'd say that's true for any craft distillery out there. You know, it's a learning curve of the first couple of years. And for us, it's not just the farm base, but it's the source whiskey as well. You know, finding out that, oh my God, if you let ADL whiskey at a certain proof age for way too long, you're going to get these notes on the back palate that just don't go away. It kind of comes in on both ends, but on the farm end, definitely getting to be better farmers was a challenge for us. We've definitely gotten well over that hump. It's now just a matter of maximizing that potential. You know, what's our field rotation look like year per year? Simple things like that.
Yeah, I love it. I just real quick, top 5 drunkest I've ever been, twice were at WhistlePig.
And I remember the next morning, I still have a picture.
Yeah, just like,
oh my God, I still have the picture. You look so sad.
No, you can't go around there without somebody handing you a drink. It's like you get there at 9 and you're up there playing pool in the little inn. Thank God they've got really nice showers because when I'm hungover, I like to lay in the shower for like an hour and a half, sleeping in the morning. Anyway, you were talking about craft distilleries, and I had a question teed up that I was excited to ask you because you know there's so much copycatting that goes on in whiskey. It's kind of like football. As soon as somebody does something well, all 32 teams in the NFL are doing it.
Philly special. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. You see it, and immediately just like everybody's like, "Oh, that works."
Yeah.
Except for winning, go Pats.
yeah, exactly. I think we're all Pats fans here, so it's fine. But what I'm interested in is when you look around at the rest of the industry, particularly craft American whiskey, which is such a kitschy and kind of obnoxious term, honestly.
It is.
But when you look around at newer distilleries, let's say that, or just newer brands, who's doing things that where you're like, that's interesting, that's really cool, they're really pushing the envelope. Where are you looking for inspiration and saying, all right, these guys, like, I'm teed in, I'm queued up, I'm ready to go and see what these guys got to say and what they're doing?
I feel like my answers are basically the same as your answers, insofar as companies like Bruichladdich, companies like Westland, where Westland in particular, you know, they're exploring the single malt category, period, but exploding it and looking at peated American whiskey, looking at using their own sourced Oregon oak, which is something very familiar to me, using Vermont oak. Bruichladdich using, you know, showing us what Islay can actually provide if you don't just stick to tradition, these different expressions across the board and really experimenting quite a bit. Even Balcones, you know, experimenting with different types of corn itself. We're used to seeing bourbon distilled from yellow dent corn number 2, super simple, classic, cheaper, but simpler flavor profile. Sweet, a little nutty, maybe not as rounded, but if you use something like a Wapsie Valley or some sort of blue variety, you can get these earthy tones. You can get these less sweet forward, less corny, more rounded and more expressive notes than you would Granted, they may be more expensive. You may get less yield in terms of starch content, but you get a better flavor profile. And again, Balcones is one that's been great in terms of experimenting with different grains. Speaking of different grains as well, Corsair has gone the malting route in terms of smoking grains in a beautiful way, where I'm sure you've tasted various expressions of theirs where they've smoked in different ways.
Yeah.
And I think they might be using smoked barrels, which is a new concept, which we can talk about after the call. But yeah, just looking at the brands that are pushing the envelope in the same way that we are, and I left a bunch out there because they're too many to cover.
No, I love it.
But,
I love it. And we've got one more really great question that Zach's going to ask you from Ryan Gilberti, who's just the man. And then we're going to do our famed white lightning round. So bring it on, Zach. Go ahead.
Yeah. So Ryan asks, and this is a really interesting question. How does the stuff that you guys are making at the distillery of a comparable age compare to the stuff that you're getting from Alberta distillers? I know that might be a hard question because you might not have the same ages, but to the extent you can answer, like, are there characteristics of each that are distinct?
Yeah, and I would say that's a tough question because there are so many answers to it. I'd say there's more consistency in terms of profile coming from Alberta because we are ordering specific profiles at, let's say, 4 years old, which we have stocks that are 4.5+ years old now. For us, we have a lot of different things going on in terms of actual entry barrel. You know, we're looking at more than one type of barrel we're going into. We're using different toast and char profiles. So we have so much more variety in terms of our backstock, where if I take a sample of Bond PD 54, it might taste nothing like Bond PD 58, which was distilled 2 weeks later, but mashed very differently, fermented with a different yeast, put into a different toasted and charred barrel, still 4.5 years old, still 100% rye, but completely different than this rye whiskey that was distilled 2 weeks before it, which was put into a maybe a classic char 3, or maybe a char 4, or maybe a special toast profile with a char and with a different mash bill as well. So I think we're going to see, or I am definitely seeing a lot more differentiation in my own stocks, which is a good thing because that allows us on the back end to have a lot more flexibility with what products we're going to create. You know, we couldn't put something like farm stock out if we didn't have these back stocks that we're sitting on and waiting with different flavor expressions. We can give you some ryes that are going to surprise the hell out of you because we're using different toast profiles that are going to give you some mocha notes on one end, and then a toast profile that's a little more vanilla and honey forward, maple syrupy. And then we blend those together and you get these different expressions of rye coming out. But the whiskey has to show it us when it's ready. You know, there's a reason why Farm Stock 3 only has 52% of our own rye at 3 years old, which is a lot of 3-year-old whiskey. But again, I'm not ready to put 100%, 3-4-year-old out. It's not quite there. However, expect to be surprised by, let's say, a 6-7-year-old, whatever it may be, farm stock release, due to the fact that we have such variety of barrel types of mash bills that we can blend, much like a Four Roses would, where they're using different yeast strains, but almost more in depth because these barrel profiles evoke such different flavors and can give you an air of maturity earlier than you might think, mitigate some of the negative, harsher notes of a new make spirit, and really give you something that's quite enjoyable to drink.
Yeah.
Right. Love the answer. It's time.
Whoa.
White lightning round.
Gotta go.
Come on.
Gotta go. It's been great. It's been
Okay.
great. Thanks so much. I'll see you guys. Bye.
Are you ready? Are you ready emotionally for this?
Sammy,
think so.
fire us off. Give us our first question, Sammy. You were jacked up.
I'm about to devastate Pete Lynch right
Hit
now.
me.
First question is it's the whiskey apocalypse. You can only say 5 distilleries.
Oh, come on. You can't ask the same fucking questions in lightning rounds that you ask in past Whiskey Wednesdays.
Oh, yes, I can.
Whoa.
Yeah.
You're actually watching?
Guess what? I know, yeah. And guess what? I know what the answer is.
Go ahead.
It's WhistlePig. It's WhistlePig. It's WhistlePig. It's WhistlePig.
Oh, get the hell out of here. That's not, zero.
No, I know. And I know the question.
Pete,
only one of them can be WhistlePig. And the answer is it's WhistlePig. It's WhistlePig. It's WhistlePig. It's WhistlePig.
Dylon.
And Dylon. Yeah, exactly.
Because you say hot fire. I got it.
Yeah,
But
honestly, if you want an honest answer,
answer.
Distilleries, not just whiskey, distilleries.
I
want the truth.
I would look to save a variety of distilleries across the world so that we can continue to provide different expressions of whiskey. I wouldn't pick one specific bourbon distillery in Kentucky, but one of the big seven for sure. I wouldn't pick one specific distillery in Japan, but you can imagine. I wouldn't pick one of the few big guys in.
No, I can't imagine you turkey.
I would like to. I would like to save one from. There's almost conveniently 5 major whiskey making regions in the world. Major, I'd say. I mean, obviously we have our Swedens and our Netherlands and our even Australia and whatnot, but I would like to preserve each category so that we can continue to see rye whiskey in America, rye whiskey in Canada,
right, point is
single
you
malt
pick
from
the
Scotland.
Quintessential distilleries for those categories.
Pick them.
Dylon.
You're a turkey. All right, fine. Then you're gonna get non-whiskey questions. Okay.
Sure.
If you weren't working in the whiskey industry, what would you be doing?
Oh, dude. Oh, I don't. Yeah, that's the stuff that haunts my nightmares. I would probably be working as a line cook because I love it so much.
All right, I love it. Line cook. Okay, and finally, third question: what is your go-to dance move?
It's called the Big Chocolate, and I don't have the room to show it to you right now. But
you have the room to show it to us.
I can teach you, Nick. You can show. It looks like Nick's got plenty of background room. You can show it to us. I can teach you.
No
Quite simply put, stand up, Nick. Come on, you got this. Stand up.
I got it.
Stand up. Arms up and straight in the air.
Hold on,
I'll do it with you if I can.
I have problems here. Hold on.
All right.
I'm ready.
Arms up. Yep. And then bring it around town. Remember SpongeBob? Bring it around town.
SpongeBob bit. You're doing a bit right now about SpongeBob.
Bring it around town.
Better than that.
There it is. Yeah, he's got it. Yeah.
SpongeBob because I'm not as young as you are.
Oh,
Back
please,
it up.
you motherfucker.
Back it up. Back it up. Back it up. Back it up.
Back it up. Arms straight up. Together. Stand tall. Hey, come on, dude. Stick with it.
You're weak. You got to show me the move yourself. Otherwise,
I don't have the room. All you can see is my beautiful chest, and I can't show that to anybody but a certain person. Nick, stay straight. Swivel the hips. It's all on the hips. If you could focus on my camera, you can see the hips right now. I'm glad that we're not focused on it, but yeah, it's all on the hips like that.
It is on the hips.
Got to work it, babe.
It's a cute little belt too.
And fun fact for those who don't know, Nick is a professionally trained ballroom dancer, so the fact that he couldn't even follow the simple instructions of the Big Chocolate is immensely disappointing. Nick, I'm never going to see a live performance of yours again.
Oh, have you been to one of my live performances?
For all you know, I've been to several.
I hope you have. It's intimidating.
Oh yeah, dude.
Just watch
it's fucking crazy.
Waltz. I Viennese waltz, and I'll Viennese waltz circles around you.
I'll teach you the Big Chocolate with the best of them, my friend. As long as you're willing to learn.
I'm intrigued. I'm really intrigued by this weird Big Chocolate dance fad that you're preaching. All right. Do we have any more questions? Phil, just give me the nod. I know you're.
Classic, Sammy.
Okay, well, it took us an
You
hour.
couldn't even get a 5 out.
Yeah,
Show me.
All I get the
Show us the bench.
All I get the one, dude. Are you kidding me? Come on.
COVID right now. COVID.
I'll get you later. I'll pay it off. Is there?
Oh damn! All right, man. It's 7. We can poke over a few minutes if there are any just dying questions. Phil, do we have anything?
Ryan Gilberti is asking, anybody have $1?
Yep, fair enough. Sammy's confirmed he does.
Yep, he's got $1 for sure. Yep.
Let's see.
That's it. They just want to throw money at us. I love it.
So I want to call back to several years ago when Nick and Zach hosted a fabulous Four Roses tasting at their house in Weston. Fun fact, myself, Nick, and Zach grew up basically 20 minutes from each other, about a decade apart, but regardless. And I loved this tasting because it was me, my folks who love whiskey, and a bunch of people around that age point, we're talking 50s plus. And Nick has provided with them basically all the small batch select releases for like the past 8 years. And I'm like, oh my God, they're getting full 3/4 ounce pours. These fuckers are getting drunk. And I just sat and waited, and Nick called me out at some point, and I'm like, yeah, it's me. And I just kind of sat and waited, nose sipped, and it was just so much fun to watch these people enjoy Four Roses expressions, first of all, but then just get so shit-faced wasted. And then afterwards, the grilling that happened, the Cubans that we smoked, fantastic experience. I can't wait to recreate that with you guys in the near future, hopefully. But
Yes.
oh my lord,
Absolutely.
Oh man, we actually got one last question that came in, so I'm dying for the answer to this. Tammy Spencer says she visited the tasting room in Vermont last year, had a wonderful time with Joshua. I assume you know who that is,
Oh, yeah.
or maybe she just forgot your name. When the time is safe, does WhistlePig have any plan to have either distillery tours or at least a visitor center? You chumps.
the answer is yes and yes. And we actually do have visitor centers at the moment that are not on the farm. One of them is in Stowe at actually the Stowe Mountain
the WhistlePig
Resort.
Pavilion.
Exactly, the pavilion.
Yeah,
Fantastic
the pavilion.
place. The dudes up there are super knowledgeable. We've trained them ourselves, and they make fantastic cocktails. They'll taste you on anything, teach you about whatever you want to know. We're also looking at, we had a potential second one in Manchester, Vermont that we're thinking about, but we'll see more tasting rooms open up. We had one in Middlebury that we've since closed due to traffic-wise, but the goal has always been, will continue to be, and until we get there, we're not stopping, is to get people to the farm. I mean, Nick, you've been there, you've seen it.
I've been there. Can you house the four of us? Can our team come up? I know you have enough rooms.
Oh yeah, we got. So you remember that hallway that used to just have like 2 double beds? That's now an official bedroom.
Oh,
yeah,
baby.
so we've had improvements,
baby.
my friend. Exactly.
Just one bed is fine. One bed is okay.
One cot for the 4 of you.
Large bed for all.
Just snuggle each other in like a rectangular prism-like formation. There you go. But no, we're definitely trying to get people to the farm. Again, it's a legislative piece when it comes down to it, where this was pre-stream, but quite simply put, allowing visitors to the farm who can then purchase things from us on the farm changes our tax code significantly. And it's a simple sort of thing at face value, but again, it's taken us at this point 8 years to get around. We're still working on it. For the same reason why it took us 5.5 years to get our distillery built, it's taking us this long to actually get people who are non-buyers to the farm. Because again, Nick, once you see the actual farm, you're like, holy shit, okay, this is actually a farm. This is for real. Like, you know, I can see the rye growing right there. I can see Pete with fucking mud all over his boots over there. You know, he just wiped out, and it's hilarious because, you know, it's a muddy field in a farm in the middle of nowhere, Vermont. But
love it.
Sadly, we're not there yet.
We're not there yet. All right, Pete, thank you. Thanks so much for coming on, man.
That's it?
Yeah, that's it, bro.
I thought it was going to be more fun. Come on. You promised me joy and endless love. And
joy. I mean, the problem is that, you know, you talk so
Sammy.
much that. No, Pete, seriously, thank you for coming on.
The problem is that I talk too much. You're quite right.
No, I know. It's all right. You can't have any joy without chatting. I promised you a forum to just speak your mind about whiskey, and there it is. No, thanks everybody for coming in, and dude, we're gonna have a panel at some point, and you're gonna have to come on and fend off some of the Scotch drinkers and see what happens.
I would love to.
But no, this was awesome. Thanks, man. Really
and
appreciate
my
it.
last note to you guys, hold please.
What is that self-portrait? What is it?
Is that a unicorn? Oh,
You are magical.
Oh, baby.
Never forget.
Beautiful.
You are magical.
Unreal.
Phil, cut the feed.
No!
How do I do that?
Feed,
Hold on a
Phil.
second.
Feed.
Phil!
Phil.
Goddamn feed,
Hold on just a second. Just a second.
Hi, Phil.